Welcome to another peaceful evening with Myths for Sleep. I'm James, and tonight we explore the extraordinary story of Sisyphus, the cleverest king who ever lived. Follow his incredible journey from deceiving the gods to discovering profound meaning in his eternal task. If you enjoy this calming tale, please show your support by liking the video and sharing in the comments which ancient story should be our next bedtime adventure. Your engagement truly helps this channel grow and bring you more restful nights. Settle in comfortably as we begin this thoughtful odyssey together. In the ancient lands of Greece, where the Mediterranean sun-kissed marble temples and olive groves swayed in gentle breezes, there lived a king whose name would echo through eternity. His name was Sisyphus, ruler of Corinth, a city that sparkled like a jewel beside the azure waters. Sisyphus was not like other kings. While others ruled with simple authority, he ruled with cunning and wit. His mind was sharp as the finest bronze blade, always turning, always scheming. The people of Corinth prospered under his reign, for he was clever in trade and wise in diplomacy. But cleverness, like fire, can warm a home or burn it down. Sisyphus possessed a mind that could not rest, could not accept the natural order of things. He questioned everything, challenged everyone, even the gods themselves. One day, as golden sunlight filtered through his palace windows, Sisyphus made a discovery that would change his fate forever. He witnessed something forbidden, something that mortal eyes were never meant to see. Zeus, the king of all gods, had taken the form of an eagle and stolen away Aegina, a beautiful river nymph. The river god Sisyphus came to Sisyphus, his ancient eyes filled with grief and rage. "My daughter has vanished," he said, his voice like rushing water over stones. "Have you seen what became of her?" Now, a wise king would have remained silent. The affairs of gods were not for mortal tongues to speak. But Sisyphus was not content with silence. He saw an opportunity, a chance to gain something precious from this divine tragedy. "I have seen what you seek to know," Sisyphus said slowly, his words measured like drops of honey. "But knowledge, even truth, has its price." Sisyphus understood. In exchange for the truth about his daughter's fate, he would grant Sisyphus something beyond mortal reach. With a gesture of his mighty hand, the river god caused a spring of fresh water to burst forth from the rocky ground of Corinth. Pure, eternal water that would never run dry, bringing prosperity to the city for all time. "Zeus has taken your daughter," Sisyphus revealed, his voice barely above a whisper. "He came as an eagle in the morning light and carried her away to his hidden places." The words hung in the air like a curse. Sisyphus departed with fury in his heart, leaving Sisyphus alone with his terrible secret and his precious spring. But secrets, especially those concerning the gods, have a way of traveling on the wind. High above on Mount Olympus, Zeus felt the tremor of betrayal. His divine ears caught whispers of his exposed deed, and his rage burned hotter than the forge of Hephaestus. Someone had dared to trade his secrets, to barter with his divine affairs as if they were common goods in a marketplace. The king of gods summoned Thanatos, Death himself, cloaked in shadows and silence. "Go to Corinth," Zeus commanded, his voice like rolling thunder. "Find the one called Sisyphus and bring him to the underworld. His cleverness has earned him a place among the dead." Thanatos descended from Olympus like a falling star, bringing with him the chill of eternal endings. He arrived at the palace of Sisyphus just as the sun was setting, painting the marble columns in shades of gold and crimson. But Sisyphus was ready. His sharp mind had already turned to this possibility, already crafted a plan within a plan. When Death himself appeared before him, draped in his dark robes, Sisyphus did not flee or cower. Instead, he smiled. "So the great Thanatos honors my humble palace with his presence," Sisyphus said, bowing with mock reverence. "Tell me, Lord of Endings, how does one such as yourself restrain a soul for the journey to Hades?" Death, proud of his eternal office, was eager to display his power. He showed Sisyphus the divine chains, forged in the depths of the earth, that could bind any soul and drag it to the underworld. "Fascinating," Sisyphus mused, examining the chains with genuine curiosity. "But surely these work only when properly applied. Could you show me exactly how they function?" And so Thanatos, in his pride and certainty, demonstrated the very chains meant to bind Sisyphus. But the clever king had positioned himself carefully, and with lightning speed, he reversed the trap. In moments, Death himself was bound in his own eternal chains, helpless and imprisoned in the palace of a mortal man. With Death himself bound in chains, something unprecedented occurred across the world of mortals. No one could die. The natural order, as old as time itself, ground to a halt like a wheel whose axle had snapped. In battlefields across the known world, warriors struck each other with bronze swords and iron spears, yet none fell. The elderly, who had long prepared for their final rest, found themselves unable to escape their worn bodies. Even those who suffered terrible accidents or grave illnesses lingered on, trapped between life and the release that would not come. Sisyphus watched this chaos unfold from his palace windows, and a strange satisfaction filled his heart. He had done what no mortal had ever accomplished. He had captured death itself, bending the fundamental force of existence to his will. For days that stretched into weeks, he kept Thanatos imprisoned, savoring his unprecedented power over fate. But the gods grow restless when the cosmic order is disturbed. Hades, lord of the underworld, found his dark realm eerily empty. No new souls arrived to join the countless shades wandering his domain. The rivers of the dead flowed quietly, carrying no fresh spirits to their eternal rest. Ares, the god of war, raged across Olympus like a caged beast. "What glory is there in battle when none can die?" he roared, his bronze armor clanging with each furious gesture. "Warriors fight without consequence, without the sweet risk that makes victory meaningful." Zeus himself felt the weight of cosmic imbalance pressing upon his divine shoulders. The threads of fate, woven by the three sisters who govern destiny, had become tangled and still. Something had to be done, and done swiftly. The king of gods descended to the mortal realm with the fury of a tempest. He appeared before Sisyphus not in disguise or gentle form, but in his full divine majesty, crackling with lightning and radiating power that made the very air shimmer. "Release death," Zeus commanded, his voice shaking the foundations of the palace. "Your cleverness has gone too far, mortal. The order of existence cannot be undone by the whims of a single man." But Sisyphus, even facing the wrath of the god of gods, maintained his composure. "Great Zeus," he said with careful politeness, "surely you understand the value of negotiation. I have something you need, and perhaps we can reach an arrangement that benefits us both." Zeus's eyes flashed with lightning. No mortal had ever dared to bargain with him as an equal. Yet the situation demanded resolution, and force alone might damage the delicate chains that held Thanatos, potentially making the problem worse. "Speak your terms," Zeus said, his voice low and dangerous like distant thunder. Sisyphus smiled, knowing he held a position of strength that no mortal had ever possessed. "I want assurance of a long life, prosperity for my city, and protection from divine retribution for my family line." The negotiation that followed was unlike any in the history of gods and mortals. Zeus, constrained by necessity, agreed to modified terms. Sisyphus would release death, but he would indeed live a long life, though Zeus privately planned consequences that the clever king could not foresee. With reluctance that tasted bitter as wormwood, Sisyphus released Thanatos from his chains. Death rose slowly, his dark robes rustling like autumn leaves, his eyes burning with cold fury. But he was bound by the agreement Zeus had made and could not immediately claim the soul of his captor. "This is not over," Thanatos whispered, his voice like the wind through empty tombs. "Time flows differently for gods than for mortals, and I am patient beyond your understanding." As death departed to resume his eternal work, the world slowly returned to its natural rhythm. In battlefields, the wounded finally found peace. The elderly closed their eyes for the last time with grateful sighs. The natural cycle of life and death resumed its ancient dance. But Sisyphus had gained something precious: time. Years passed and his hair grew gray, then white as mountain snow. His kingdom prospered beyond measure, blessed by the spring Sisyphus had given him and protected by Zeus's reluctant agreement. Yet as his earthly years accumulated like leaves in autumn, Sisyphus began to contemplate a problem that even his cunning mind struggled to solve. Death would eventually come for him, as it came for all mortals. His long life was not eternal life, and when his time ended, he would face judgment in the underworld for his defiance of the gods. Sisyphus' Sleep Story, Part 3. As the seasons turned and years flowed like water through his fingers, Sisyphus felt the approach of his final hour. His body, though blessed with longevity, could not escape the fundamental truth that all mortal flesh must return to dust. But his mind, sharp as ever, was already weaving one final, desperate plan. He called his beloved wife Merope to his bedside as the evening shadows grew long across Corinth. She was still beautiful, though silver now threaded through her dark hair like moonbeams on a quiet lake. "My dear wife," Sisyphus said, taking her gentle hands in his own weathered ones, "I must ask something of you that will seem strange, even cruel. When I die, you must not perform the proper burial rites. Do not place coins upon my eyes for Charon's ferry. Do not anoint my body with oils or wrap it in fine linens. Leave me as I am." Merope's eyes filled with tears of confusion and grief. "But my lord, without proper rites, your soul will wander lost between worlds. You will have no peace in death, no passage to the underworld's rest." "Trust me," Sisyphus whispered, his voice growing weak but his eyes still bright with cunning. "This is the only way our story can continue beyond the grave. Promise me." Though her heart broke with the strangeness of the request, Merope loved her husband enough to honor his final wish. She promised, not understanding that she was becoming part of the greatest deception ever attempted against the realm of the dead. When Sisyphus finally closed his eyes for the last time, his soul descended into the shadowy realm of Hades. He found himself standing on the banks of the river Styx, where countless souls waited in lines like autumn leaves gathered by an endless wind. The air was thick with mist and the whispered sorrows of the departed. Charon the ferryman, ancient beyond measure, poled his boat through the dark waters. His eyes were like hollow coins, his beard like tangled seaweed. When souls approached his ferry, he extended a skeletal hand for payment, but when Sisyphus approached, he spread his hands to show they were empty. "I have no coins for passage," he said with practiced sorrow. "My wife, in her grief, forgot the proper rites. I am trapped here on these shores, unable to cross to my final judgment." Charon examined the soul before him with eyes that had seen every form of human sorrow. "It is not uncommon," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "Sometimes the living, overwhelmed by loss, forget the ancient customs. You must return to the world above and ensure your burial is completed properly." This was exactly what Sisyphus had hoped to hear. But he feigned reluctance, as if the prospect of returning to life was a burden rather than his deepest desire. "Must I really leave this place? Surely there is another way." "The laws of death are absolute," Charon replied, already turning his attention to other souls. "Return, complete your rites, and then come back to receive proper judgment." And so Sisyphus found himself climbing back up from the underworld, his soul traversing the dark paths that led from death to life. It was a journey no mortal had ever made in reverse, ascending from shadow into sunlight, from ending back to beginning. When he materialized in his palace, Merope nearly fainted with shock and joy. Her husband stood before her, translucent as morning mist but unmistakably alive. "It worked," he said with a smile that held all his old cunning. "I have been granted leave to return and complete my burial rites." But Sisyphus had no intention of hurrying back to death. Instead, he used his supernatural state to enjoy a strange second life. He could appear and disappear at will, observe his kingdom without being seen, and experience the world from a perspective no living person had ever known. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. The seasons changed, and still Sisyphus lingered in the world of the living, savoring every sunrise, every gentle breeze, every moment of existence he had stolen from death itself. But the gods are not easily fooled forever, and patience has its limits even in the realm of immortals. Hades himself began to notice that one particular soul had failed to return from its furlough among the living. The lord of the underworld sent his servants to investigate, and they returned with news that made his ancient blood boil with rage. Sisyphus, the mortal who had once chained death itself, was now making a mockery of the afterlife, living as a ghost among mortals and refusing to accept his final judgment. This transgression was beyond forgiveness, beyond the tolerance of even the most patient god. Hades rose from his obsidian throne in the deepest chambers of the underworld, his crown of shadows trembling with barely contained fury. No mortal had ever dared to deceive death twice, to treat the sacred boundaries between life and afterlife as mere suggestions to be ignored at will. The very foundations of cosmic order trembled with this unprecedented defiance. He summoned not Thanatos this time, but Hermes, the swift messenger god who could travel between all realms with the speed of thought itself. "Go to the mortal realm," Hades commanded, his voice echoing through the caverns of the dead like distant thunder. "Find Sisyphus and drag him here immediately. Use whatever force is necessary." Hermes descended to earth like a falling star wrapped in golden light. He found Sisyphus in his palace gardens, translucent and shimmering, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The king turned as he sensed the divine presence, and for the first time in his long life of schemes and deceptions, genuine fear flickered in his eyes. "Your time of running is over," Hermes said, his voice carrying the authority of all Olympus. "Hades has grown tired of your games, and Zeus himself has decreed that your punishment can no longer be delayed." This time there was no clever escape, no cunning plan, no negotiation that could save him. Hermes seized Sisyphus with hands that burned like lightning, and together they plummeted through the earth toward the realm of eternal shadows. The journey to the underworld felt endless and instantaneous all at once. Sisyphus saw the layers of earth and stone rushing past, then the dark rivers that bordered the land of the dead, and finally the vast caverns where countless souls wandered in eternal twilight. He was brought before Hades himself in the great judgment hall, where the three judges of the dead sat on thrones carved from single blocks of midnight black stone. Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus looked upon him with eyes that had witnessed every sin and virtue of humanity. But it was Hades who spoke, his voice carrying the weight of countless eons. "Sisyphus of Corinth," the Lord of the Dead intoned, "you have committed crimes against the very order of existence. You betrayed the secrets of Zeus. You chained death himself. You deceived the guardians of the afterlife, and refused to accept your rightful place among the dead. For these transgressions, you will receive a punishment that fits the magnitude of your defiance. The hall fell silent except for the distant whispers of wandering souls. Even the judges leaned forward to hear what fate would befall this most audacious of mortals. Sisyphus stood straight despite his fear, his pride intact even in the face of divine judgment. "You will be taken to Tartarus," Hades continued, "to the deepest pit of punishment where the most defiant souls learn the meaning of eternal consequence. There you will find a great boulder, heavy as a mountain, solid as the bones of the earth itself. Your task will be to push this stone to the summit of a tall hill." Sisyphus frowned, confusion mixing with his fear. The punishment seemed almost mundane compared to the torments he had witnessed other souls enduring. But Hades was not finished. "When you reach the top," the god continued, his words falling like hammer blows, "the boulder will roll back down to the bottom. And you will begin again, and again, and again. For all eternity, you will push this stone up the hill, only to watch it tumble back down, your work forever undone, your effort forever meaningless." The full horror of the punishment settled over Sisyphus like a suffocating shroud. It was not the physical pain that would torment him, but the endless repetition, the eternal futility, the knowledge that his struggle would never achieve anything of lasting value. His greatest weapon had always been his intellect, his ability to find solutions and craft clever plans. But there would be no solution to this problem, no clever escape from this fate. Hermes led him through the darkest passages of the underworld, past the river of fire and the fields of mourning, to the very bottom of Tartarus. There, on a barren hillside under a sunless sky, sat the boulder that would become his eternal companion. It was massive beyond imagination, a sphere of grey stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its surface was smooth as polished marble but cold as winter's heart. When Sisyphus placed his hands upon it for the first time, he felt its terrible weight not just in his arms and back, but in his very soul. "Begin," Hermes said simply, and then the messenger god vanished, leaving Sisyphus alone with his punishment. The silence of Tartarus pressed around him like a living thing, broken only by his own breathing and the sound of his feet finding purchase on the rocky ground. And so Sisyphus began to push. The first push was the hardest, not because of the physical strain, but because of the crushing realization of what lay ahead. Sisyphus pressed his shoulder against the cold stone and felt every muscle in his immortal body strain against its immense weight. Slowly, impossibly slowly, the boulder began to move. Each step up the hill was a victory measured in inches. His feet dug into the rocky soil, seeking any grip that might help him advance. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air of Tartarus, and his breathing became labored as he pushed higher and higher up the endless slope. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time had little meaning in this place where the sun never rose and the stars never appeared. There was only the boulder, the hill, and the gradual progress toward a summit that seemed to recede with each painful step forward. But progress was progress, and Sisyphus had not survived so long by abandoning hope at the first sign of difficulty. He found rhythm in his work, a steady pattern of push and step, that carried him slowly but surely toward his goal. His mind, ever active, began to analyze the task before him, searching for techniques that might make the work easier or more efficient. He learned to read the stone's balance, to find the slight variations in weight distribution that could be exploited. He discovered which paths up the hillside offered the best footing, which angles of approach minimized the risk of the boulder slipping sideways. Even in this place of punishment, his clever mind refused to surrender its need to solve problems and find better ways. The summit grew closer. What had seemed impossible at the bottom of the hill now appeared almost within reach. Sisyphus could see the flat space at the top where, at last, his burden would come to rest and his task would be complete. A fierce joy filled his heart as he made the final push, straining every fiber of his being against the massive stone. And then he was there. The boulder sat perfectly balanced on the summit, motionless and conquered. For one perfect moment, Sisyphus stood triumphant, his impossible task completed through sheer determination and skill. He had beaten the punishment of the gods themselves. But even as that thought formed in his mind, he felt the boulder shift slightly. A tiny tremor ran through the stone, so small it might have been his imagination. Then another, stronger this time. The boulder rocked gently, as if testing its balance on the narrow summit. "No," Sisyphus whispered, pressing his hands against the stone, trying to hold it steady. But the summit was designed with cruel precision. No matter how perfectly the boulder might be balanced, the slightest disturbance would send it rolling back down the way it had come. The stone tilted past the point of recovery. Sisyphus watched in helpless horror as his boulder, his burden, his enemy and companion, began its inexorable journey back to the bottom of the hill. It rolled slowly at first, then faster and faster, gathering momentum until it crashed into the base of the slope with a sound like distant thunder. And there it sat, exactly where it had been when he began. All his effort, all his pain, all his careful planning and execution had been erased in moments. The hill looked exactly as it had before, unmarked by his passage, indifferent to his struggle. The second ascent was worse than the first. Now he knew exactly what awaited him at the top. The joy of progress was tainted by the knowledge of its futility. Yet he began again, because what else was there to do? In this place of eternal punishment, stopping was not an option, and delay only prolonged the inevitable. This time he tried to push faster, hoping that speed might somehow change the outcome. But the boulder was just as heavy, the hill just as steep, and his immortal body just as limited in its strength. The summit beckoned with the same false promise of completion, and when he reached it, the same terrible repetition played out again. The third time he attempted to find a different path, thinking perhaps the route might affect the boulder's stability at the top. The fourth time, he tried to build small supports along the way, gathering loose stones to create barriers that might catch the boulder if it fell. But in Tartarus, even the smallest rocks crumbled to dust at his touch, and every strategy failed with methodical certainty. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. The pattern never varied. Push, climb, reach the summit, watch the boulder fall, begin again. Sisyphus felt his sanity straining under the weight of endless repetition. His clever mind turning in circles like a caged animal seeking escape where none existed. But something strange began to happen as the centuries passed. The mind that had once schemed against gods and deceived death itself started to find a different kind of wisdom in the endless repetition of his task. At first, this wisdom came as flashes of insight during the long pushes up the hill, moments when his consciousness seemed to expand beyond the narrow focus of his punishment. He began to notice things he had missed before. The way shadows played across the rocky surface of his boulder, creating patterns that shifted like slow-moving clouds. The subtle changes in the feel of the stone as eons of handling had worn smooth grooves where his hands and shoulder made contact. The rhythm of his own breathing, steady and eternal as the tides. In those moments, Sisyphus realized something profound. The punishment was not just about the futility of his efforts. It was about learning to find meaning in the effort itself, regardless of the outcome. The gods had intended to break his spirit with endless repetition, but instead, they had given him unlimited time to understand something that most mortals never glimpsed in their brief lives. The boulder, he came to understand, was not his enemy. It was his teacher, his companion in a journey that had no destination but infinite depth. Each push up the hill was unique, even though the end result was always the same. The angle of his approach varied slightly. The distribution of his weight changed with his mood and energy. The thoughts that occupied his mind during the climb painted each journey with different colors of consciousness. He began to take joy in the simple sensation of movement, the play of muscles working in harmony, the satisfaction of finding the perfect rhythm that would carry him steadily upward. The summit, once a symbol of completion and subsequent disappointment, became simply another point in an endless cycle, no more or less important than any step along the way. Years became decades, decades became centuries, and centuries accumulated into millennia. Sisyphus's understanding deepened with each cycle. He learned to be fully present in each moment of his task, neither dwelling on the countless repetitions behind him, nor anticipating the inevitable outcome ahead. Sometimes, during the descent to retrieve his fallen boulder, he would pause and observe the view from different points on the hillside. The landscape of Tartarus, he discovered, was not as barren as it had first appeared. Subtle variations in the rock formations created a kind of austere beauty. The play of the eternal twilight across the stone surfaces revealed textures and patterns that spoke of geological ages beyond mortal comprehension. He learned to appreciate the weight of the boulder not as a burden, but as a constant that gave structure and purpose to his existence. Without the stone, without the hill, without the eternal task, what would he be but another wandering shade in the underworld? His punishment had become his identity. His torment had transformed into his path. The walk back down the hill to begin again, once the most depressing part of his cycle, became a time of reflection and preparation. He would plan the next ascent not with the futile hope of achieving a different outcome, but with the deeper satisfaction of refining his technique, of making each push as perfect as possible within its own self-contained moment. Sisyphus discovered that consciousness itself was the real prize hidden within his punishment. While other souls in the underworld drifted in forgetful haze, lost in memories of their former lives or consumed by regret for their earthly sins, he remained vibrantly alive in his awareness. The constant physical engagement with his task kept his mind sharp and his spirit engaged with immediate reality. He began to understand that the gods, in their attempt to devise the perfect punishment, had inadvertently created the perfect meditation. The repetitive nature of his labor, combined with its eternal duration, had stripped away all the distractions that clouded human perception. There were no social obligations to fulfill, no political schemes to pursue, no accumulation of wealth or status to pursue. There was only the stone, the hill, and the eternal present moment of conscious effort. In this clarity, Sisyphus found a kind of freedom that he had never known as a king. His thoughts were his own, unlimited and uncontrolled by any external authority. His punishment had freed him from all the small tyrannies of mortal existence. The need to eat, the requirement to sleep, the pressure to maintain appearances before subjects and enemies alike. Sometimes, as he pushed his boulder up the familiar slope, Sisyphus would laugh. The sound echoed strangely in the empty air of Tartarus, a note of genuine joy in a place designed for eternal suffering. He laughed at the cosmic irony of his situation, at the unintended gift the gods had given him in their anger. They had sought to break him with meaninglessness, but he had found meaning in the breaking itself. The boulder reached the summit once again, and once again it rolled back down. But now Sisyphus watched its descent with something approaching affection. The stone was not separate from him, but part of a larger system of which he too was a component. The hill, the boulder, and the man pushing it formed a kind of eternal dance, a cosmic rhythm that pulsed with its own strange beauty. As he walked down to begin yet another ascent, Sisyphus reflected on the nature of rebellion itself. He had spent his mortal life rebelling against authority, against the gods, against the limitations placed upon human ambition. Now he understood that the deepest rebellion was not against external forces, but against the internal tendency toward despair and meaninglessness. Every push of the boulder was an act of defiance against nihilism. Every step up the hill was a declaration that consciousness, effort, and engagement with reality had value independent of any ultimate achievement or final reward. He had become not just a prisoner of Tartarus, but its most liberated inhabitant. The centuries continued to flow around him like a slow river, but Sisyphus no longer felt their weight as oppression. Time had become his medium rather than his prison, an infinite canvas upon which he painted the same perfect gesture again and again. each repetition adding new layers of understanding and appreciation. And so the eternal cycle continued, but now it carried within it a different quality of experience. Sisyphus had become something the gods had never intended, a soul at peace with his punishment, finding richness in what was meant to be barren, discovering joy in what was designed to bring only suffering. Each morning in Tartarus, if morning was the right word for the subtle shift in the eternal twilight that marked the passage of time, Sisyphus would approach his boulder with something approaching eagerness. Not the eager anticipation of completion, but the deeper excitement of engaging once again with a task that had become as familiar and essential to him as breathing. He had learned to love the weight of the stone against his shoulder, the way his muscles responded to the familiar challenge, the gradual warming of his body as he began the long ascent. The hill had become his mountain, his domain, his place of pilgrimage where each step was both a prayer and its own answer. Other souls in Tartarus sometimes caught glimpses of him during their own punishments, and they were puzzled by what they saw. Here was a man who should have been broken by eons of futile labor, yet he moved with purpose and something that looked remarkably like contentment. His face, though marked by eternal effort, held no trace of the despair that characterized most inhabitants of this place of ultimate punishment. Word of this anomaly eventually reached the ears of Hades himself, who descended from his throne to observe the strange prisoner who had somehow transformed punishment into practice, torment into teaching. The Lord of the Dead watched from the shadows as Sisyphus pushed his boulder up the hill with steady, rhythmic movements, humming an ancient tune under his breath. "Do you not suffer?" Hades asked, his voice causing the very air to tremble with divine authority. Sisyphus paused in his labor, turning to face the god who had designed his eternal torment. "I suffer," he replied simply, "but I have learned that suffering and joy are not opposites. They are dance partners, each giving meaning to the other. Without the weight of this stone, how would I know the pleasure of movement? Without the certainty of failure, how would I appreciate the beauty of effort itself?" Hades frowned, disturbed by this unexpected response. "You were meant to despair. The futility of your task was designed to crush your spirit and teach you the consequences of defying the cosmic order." "And it has taught me," Sisyphus said, resuming his push up the hill. "It has taught me that meaning is not something we find, but something we create. It has taught me that the cosmic order includes not just authority and submission, but also the possibility of transformation through acceptance and understanding." The god of the dead watched until Sisyphus reached the summit and the boulder inevitably rolled back down. But instead of crying out in frustration or rage, the punished king simply nodded as if greeting an old friend, then began his descent to start the cycle anew. Hades returned to his throne deeply troubled. A punishment that brought wisdom rather than suffering, that created meaning rather than destroying it, was no punishment at all. Yet to change Sisyphus's fate now would be to admit that the original sentence had failed, something no god could easily acknowledge. Meanwhile, Sisyphus continued his eternal task. But now he carried within himself a secret that transformed everything. He had discovered that the human spirit, when stripped of all external supports and forced to confront the most basic elements of existence, could find in that confrontation not defeat, but victory. The boulder rolled down the hill for the 10,000th time, or perhaps the 100,000th. Numbers had long since lost their meaning in this place where time flowed like honey. Sisyphus walked down to meet his stone companion, his steps light despite the eons of labor, his heart somehow lighter still. In the deepest pit of punishment, designed by gods to break the spirits of the most defiant mortals, one man had found a way to be free. Not free from his boulder, not free from his hill, not free from the eternal repetition of his task, but free within it all. Free to find meaning in meaninglessness, joy in sorrow, victory in defeat. And in that freedom, Sisyphus had achieved something that even the gods had not anticipated. He had become larger than his punishment, greater than his circumstances, more powerful than the forces that sought to diminish him. His boulder would roll forever, and he would push it forever. But he would do so as a man who had learned the deepest secret of existence. That the meaning of life is not found in reaching the summit, but in the quality of consciousness we bring to each step of the eternal climb. I hope this journey with Sisyphus has shown you how even in life's most challenging moments, we can find meaning and peace. May his wisdom guide you toward understanding that every effort has value and every step forward matters. If you found comfort in this ancient tale of transformation, please subscribe to discover more stories that will gently carry you into restful sleep. You can now let this video continue playing in the background. The soothing music that follows will help you drift even deeper into slumber. Allow your body to release all tension and surrender completely to rest. Just as Sisyphus found peace in his eternal task, let this gentle melody watch over your peaceful dreams.